Why Dr. Anthony Fauci should be in jail, the biggest scam in American history. Dr. Anthony Fauci, the so-called nation's top doctor, the man who was paraded around like the messiah of public health, the bureaucrat who somehow convinced millions of people that he was infallible, is walking free. Not only is he free, but he's also filthy rich, enjoying his cushy retirement while the rest of America is left to pick up the pieces from the disaster he helped create. Millions of lives were destroyed under his incompetence, lies, and manipulation. Small businesses were wiped out, children were masked and isolated for no reason. Families lost loved ones under policies that he swore were based on the science tab. And in the end, he was rewarded instead of held accountable. Meanwhile, if you refused to get vaccinated, questioned the lockdowns, or even suggested that maybe, just maybe, COVID-19 came from a lab that Fauci was funding, you were labeled a conspiracy theorist, deplatformed, or even fired from your job. And what happens to the guy at the center of it all, the one who lied, covered up evidence, manipulated the system, and made himself richer than ever before? A preemptive pardon from Biden, that's right. Before he could even face an investigation, before a single charge could be filed, he got a get-out-of-jail-free card. Because, as we all know, the rules don't apply to the elite. This is the biggest scam in American history. And we're all supposed to just accept it. Well, let's break it all down. Let's talk about why Anthony Fauci is one of the most corrupt figures in modern history, how his policies destroyed lives, and why the fact that he's sitting comfortably in his multi-million-dollar home instead of a prison cell is a national disgrace. 1. The lab leak cover-up. Fauci was desperate to bury the truth. From the very beginning of the pandemic, Fauci was hell-bent on silencing anyone who suggested that COVID-19 came from a lab. This was strange considering any reasonable person could see that it was a real possibility. The virus just so happened to emerge next to a lab that was literally studying bat coronaviruses. But Fauci made sure the media labeled anyone questioning the official story as a conspiracy theorist. Why? Because he knew he was involved. Through EcoHealth Alliance, Fauci's NIH had been funneling taxpayer money to the Wuhan Institute of Virology for years. The research being conducted there was gain-of-function research, the kind that makes viruses more transmissible and more dangerous. So when COVID-19 broke out, Fauci panicked. Emails show that top scientists privately told him that the virus looked engineered. They said it was inconsistent with natural evolution. So what did he do? He told them to shut up. He called emergency meetings, pressured scientists to publicly dismiss the lab leak theory, and worked behind the scenes to make sure the media would push the natural origin story. And it worked. For over 2 years, you weren't allowed to talk about the lab leak theory without getting censored. The scientists who tried to investigate it were ridiculed and blacklisted, all because Fauci couldn't risk people finding out that he had funded the very research that may have caused the pandemic. If this had been anyone else, this would be a criminal cover-up. But because it was Fauci, the media ran interference for him.
Dr. Fauci, knowing that it is a crime to lie to Congress, do you wish to retract your statement of May 11th where you claimed that the NIH never funded gain-of-function research in Wuhan?
Senator Paul, I have never lied before the Congress, and I do not retract that statement. This paper that you are referring to was judged by qualified staff up and down the chain as not being gain of function.
So
let me finish.
You take an animal virus and you increase its transmissibility to humans.
Right.
You're saying that's not gain of function?
Yeah, that is correct. And Senator Paul, you do not know what you are talking about, quite frankly. And I want to say that officially. You do not know what you are talking about. Okay, you get
NIH,
one person.
Let's read from the NIH definition of gain of function. This is your definition that you guys wrote. It says that scientific research that increases the transmissibility among animals is gain of function. They took animal viruses that only occur in animals and they increased their transmissibility to humans. How you can say that is not gain of function?
It is not.
It's a dance, and you're dancing around this because you're trying to obscure responsibility for 4 million people dying around the world from a pandemic.
And let's send Dr. Fauci.
I have to, well, now you're getting into something. If the point that you are making is that the grant that was funded as a sub-award from EcoHealth to Wuhan created SARS-CoV-2. That's where you are getting. Let me finish.
We don't know.
Well, wait a minute.
It did come from the lab, but all the evidence is pointing that it came from the lab, and there will be responsibility for those who funded the lab, including yourself.
I totally
This committee will allow the witness to respond.
I totally resent the lie that you are now propagating, Senator. Because if you look at the viruses that were used in the experiments, that were given in the annual reports, that were published in the literature, it is molecularly impossible.
No one's saying those viruses caused it.
It
no
is
one is alleging that those viruses caused the pandemic. What we're alleging is that gain-of-function research was going on in that lab, and NIH funded it.
That is
you can't get away from it. It meets your definition, and you are obfuscating the truth.
I'm not obfuscating the truth.
Senator
You are the
Paul's
one.
time is expired, but I will allow the witness to.
Let me just finish. I want everyone to understand that if you look at those viruses, and that's judged by qualified virologists and evolutionary biologists, those viruses are molecularly impossible to result in SARS-CoV-2.
Caused the pandemic.
Senator Paul,
we're saying they are gain-of-function viruses because they were animal viruses that became more transmissible in human, and you funded it.
And you
admit the truth.
And you implying...
Senator Paul, your time has expired, and I will allow witnesses who come before this committee to respond.
And you are implying that what we did was responsible for the deaths of individuals. I totally resent that. And if anybody is lying here, Senator, it is you.
2. He funded gain-of-function research, then lied about it to Congress. Fauci didn't just downplay the lab leak theory. He straight up lied under oath about his role in funding the research. When questioned by Congress, he arrogantly declared that the NIH has never funded gain-of-function research at the Wuhan lab. He acted as if even suggesting such a thing was an insult to his holy reputation. Then just a year later, the NIH admitted in an official letter that the research Fauci funded did enhance viruses to make them more dangerous. In other words, he perjured himself. He lied to Congress. He lied to the American people. And what happened? Nothing. If an average citizen lied to Congress, they'd be thrown in jail faster than you can say, trust the science. But because Fauci is a government insider, he walks away without consequences.
You said in an interview that you gave as part of an audiobook written by Michael Spector that you believed an institutional should make it hard for people to live their lives so they'd feel pressured to get vaccinated. Could we run the audio clip on that, please?
You think can be done about it? I have to say that I don't see a big solution other than some sort of mandatory vaccination. I know federal officials don't like to use that term.
Once people feel empowered and protected legally, you are going to have schools, universities, and colleges are going to say, you want to come to this college, buddy? You're going to get vaccinated. Lady, you're going to get vaccinated.
Yeah.
Big corporations like Amazon and Facebook and all of those others are going to say, you want to work for us, you get vaccinated. And it's been proven that when you make it difficult for people in their lives, they lose their ideological bullshit and they get vaccinated.
Thank you. Are all objections to COVID vaccinations ideological bullshit, Dr. Fauci?
No, they're not, and that's not what I was referring to.
Well, in reference to making it hard for people to get education, traveling, working, I'd say it very much was in context.
3, he made himself filthy rich while Americans suffered. While millions of Americans lost their jobs, lost their businesses, and were forced to follow lockdown orders that did nothing to stop the virus, Fauci was raking in cash. He was already the highest paid government official in America, pulling in more money than the president, but that wasn't enough. His net worth skyrocketed during the pandemic. He made millions in government grants, book deals, and investments, all while telling the public to shut up and do as they were told. While small business owners were being bankrupted by lockdowns, Fauci was living like a king. And when people started demanding answers, he played dumb.
Just before their 10-6 loss to the Baltimore Orioles on Sunday, the New York Yankees announced a 9th person in the organization has now tested positive for COVID. The Yankees have 9 total positives within the traveling party since last week, 3 coaches, 5 staffers, and shortstop Gleyber Torres. Now, according to the Yankees, at least 8 of those folks tested positive despite being fully vaccinated. So if you're feeling a little confused or unnerved or unsure, you're not alone. Can't think of a better person to answer those concerns than Dr. Anthony Fauci, Chief Medical Advisor to President Biden and Director of the National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Diseases. It's great to have you back, Dr. Fauci. Let's start. I want to talk about the masking, but let's start where we just left off with the Yankees, because I think it's probably the first and most high-profile outbreak amongst folks that are vaccinated we've had, right? We're talking about an environment when people have gotten the vaccination. What is your takeaway? What do you see when you look at this in terms of what it means for other people who are vaccinated but maybe still nervous about exposure?
Well, it's important to point out, Chris, that there's certainly breakthrough infections. Breakthrough infections mean you have been vaccinated, but you still get infected. But the critical point is that I think 7 out of 8 or 8 out of 9 of them had no symptoms at all, which means it is very likely that the level of virus in their nasopharynx is low and they won't transmit it. So although you don't like to see breakthroughs, the fact is this is one of the encouraging aspects about the efficacy of the vaccine. It'll either protect you completely against infection. If you do get infected, the chances are that you're going to be without symptoms, and the chances are very likely that you'll not be able to transmit it to other people. So again, you don't like to see breakthroughs, but to me, this is not something that's a shocker to me at all.
So that, I mean, look, we're talking about large numbers, right? So when you're running things at iteratively large numbers, you're going to have breakthrough infections, right? So something is 95%, effective. We've got millions of people in this country where you get breakthrough infections. But this relates, I think, to the CDC mask guidance, right? So I guess the first question is, this is just a point of information. What did you know about that guidance? What were you communicated by the CDC in terms of the timeline for when you found it out and then had to communicate it to Americans?
Well, to be honest with you, Chris, I found out about it a couple of hours before it was announced. But the science behind it, I mean, obviously there's discussion and concern about the abruptness of the announcement and all that, but the science behind it, the fact that we know now that these vaccines are highly, highly effective, number one. Number two, they're really, really good against variants. I mean, the predominant variant in our country is the 117. The one that originated in the UK, it protects very well against that. And the other thing is that, and this relates to the New York Yankees situation, is that we're learning now with recent studies that even if you do get a breakthrough infection when you're vaccinated, the chances of your transmitting it to someone else is exceedingly low. So low likelihood of transmission, low likelihood of getting infected. When you do get infected, the chances are you're going to be without symptoms. And because of that, that was the accumulating scientific data that prompted the CDC to make that recommendation that when people are vaccinated, they can feel safe that they are not going to get infected, whether they're outdoors or indoors. That's the bottom line of that, to get people to appreciate you get vaccinated and you're really quite safe from getting infected. There will always be breakthrough infections,
right?
But given the denominator of people who are vaccinated, that's a very, very rare event. So the bottom line, Chris, it's good news. And in many respects, it really is a big, endorsement for why people should be getting vaccinated.
4, the mask lies, the lockdown lies, and the power grab. Remember when Fauci told the public masks didn't work? Then just a few months later, he turned around and pushed for mandatory masking for everyone, including children? What changed? Nothing. He later admitted he lied about masks not working because he didn't want people hoarding them. Let's think about that for a second. The expert we were supposed to trust lied to us because he thought we were too dumb to handle the truth. Then it didn't stop there. He pushed for school closures even though it was obvious that COVID-19 was barely a threat to children. He pushed for vaccine mandates despite previously saying that forcing people to take a vaccine would be unethical. He flip-flopped on everything and every time. It was never about science. It was about control.
Dr. Anthony Fauci on defense.
When you're dealing with a new outbreak, things change.
And dismissing claims he played any part in a suggested cover-up of COVID origins.
The accusation being circulated is absolutely false and simply preposterous.
The doctor, who retired 18 months ago, back in the spotlight as part of a Republican-led investigation into the pandemic's origins and response. A hearing at times turning testy.
Mr. Fauci, because you're not doctor, that man does not deserve to have a license. As a matter of fact, it should be revoked and he belongs in prison.
Suspend.
Fauci explaining what he meant when he testified behind closed doors in January that the 6-foot social distancing rule sort of just appeared, according to transcripts. Now clarifying it came from the CDC with no clinical trials done.
You didn't feel an obligation as the lead scientist at the NIH to challenge that.
I've challenged the CDC multiple times.
Fauci served in his government role since 1984, advising 7 presidents of both parties, and was a prominent expert in the fight against diseases like HIV/AIDS. Back when COVID started spreading, he became the pandemic's public face, appearing in briefings, in magazines.
Here's Dr. Anthony Fauci
on late-night shows. But since then, he's become politically polarizing, alternately idolized or demonized. Overnight, Fauci saying the vitriol he faces, including on Capitol Hill, means he still gets death threats, even while out of government service.
You have performances like that unusual performance by Marjorie Taylor Greene in today's hearing. Those are the kind of things that drive up the death threats.
Testifying emotionally now about the death threats his family has faced.
It is very troublesome to me. It is much more troublesome because they've involved my wife and my 3 daughters.
At these moments, how do you feel?
Terrible.
As for how prepared we are for the next pandemic, Dr. Fauci thinks in some respects we're better equipped to deal with one, but says he's disappointed with other areas from the COVID pandemic, like the divisiveness over a coherent response.
5. Biden's pardon, the ultimate proof that he's guilty. Just in case there was any doubt that Fauci was terrified of an investigation, President Biden made sure he wouldn't have to face one. In January 2025, Biden issued a preemptive pardon for Fauci, protecting him from any federal charges related to his handling of the pandemic. Let's be clear, you don't issue a pardon unless there's something to pardon. Biden and his cronies knew Fauci was guilty. They knew that if he were actually investigated, the evidence would be overwhelming. So instead of letting justice take its course, they protected him before he could even be charged. That's not justice, that's corruption.
The new things in this administration is if you don't know the answer, don't guess. Just say you don't know the answer. Yeah. Yes.
Dr. Fauci, a couple of questions, if I might. I'd like to follow up.
Dr. Fauci, you're one of the few holdovers from the previous administration to this current one. What has been your experience with this new team? And in your view, what would have been different in terms of the trajectory of this outbreak from the start had a team like this been in place at the beginning?
Well, I can tell you my impression of what's going on right now. The team, I don't know if I can extrapolate other things, but one of the things that was very clear as recently as about 15 minutes ago when I was with the president is that one of the things that we're going to do is to be completely transparent, open, and honest. If things go wrong, not point fingers, but to correct them and to make everything we do be based on science and evidence. I mean, that was literally a conversation I had 15 minutes ago with the president. And he has said that multiple times.
That you, looking back on your comments over the last 10 or 12 months, would like to now, with that sort of license, to amend or clarify?
No, I mean, I always said everything on the base. That's why I got in trouble sometimes. Right.
Yes. You mentioned pharmacies. The news.
You've joked a couple times today already about the difference that you feel in being kind of the spokesperson for this issue in this administration versus the previous one. Can you talk a little bit about how much different do you feel, less constrained? What is the, you for so many times you stood up behind the podium with Donald Trump standing behind you. That was a different feeling, I'm sure, than it is today. Can you talk a little bit about how you feel kind of released from what you had been doing for the last year?
Yeah, but you said I was joking about it. I was very serious about it. I wasn't joking. No, actually, I mean, obviously, I don't want to be going back, over history, but it was very clear that there were things that were said, be it regarding things like hydroxychloroquine and other things like that, that really was uncomfortable because they were not based on scientific fact. I can tell you, I take no pleasure at all in being in a situation of contradicting the president. So it was really something that you didn't feel that you could actually say something and there wouldn't be any repercussions about it. The idea that you can get up here and talk about what you know, what the evidence, what the science is, and know that's it. Let the science speak. It is somewhat of a liberating feeling.
You were basically banished for a few months there for a while. You feel like you're back now?
I think so.
Well,
Okay.
that's Mike Shear. You don't want to take questions from him. Thank you, Dr. Fauci, so much for joining us. We really appreciate it, and we'll have him back again. So thank you.
Final thoughts? Fauci's crimes must not be forgotten. Dr. Anthony Fauci lied to the public, he lied to Congress, and he funded dangerous research that may have caused the pandemic. He covered up critical information. He abused his power for personal gain. And instead of being held accountable, he was rewarded with a cushy retirement and legal immunity. If justice still existed in America, Fauci would be in a prison cell. Instead, he's laughing all the way to the bank. This cannot be allowed to stand.